Rosa Martinez had never thought of herself as a soldier in the way most people imagined. She didn't stride through deserts with a rifle strapped across her chest, nor did she patrol dangerous villages with adrenaline surging through her veins. Her uniform looked the same as everyone else's, but her job kept her far from the firefights that defined the daily lives of combat units. She was the Armory Clerk. Her world was made of numbers, serial codes, and signatures. Every morning, she walked into the cramped metal building with its constant smell of oil and steel, unlocking racks of rifles that gleamed under flickering fluorescent lights. She signed them out to soldiers with practiced precision, checking each name against lists that never seemed to end. To most, Rosa was just another background figure. They saw her as the woman who handed them their weapons before they rushed, off to places she would never go. She was invisible, yet she noticed everything. Rosa had always been an observer. She noticed the nervous laugh of a young private who double-checked his rifle as though it might disappear. She saw the haunted eyes of a sergeant who returned his weapon silently, avoiding conversation. She even picked up on the cocky strut of seasoned men who whistled as they signed their names, pretending fear didn't touch them. Every face told a story, and Rosa silently collected them all. At night, when the base quieted and the hum of generators replaced the day's chaos, she sat alone in her small quarters, replaying those stories. She didn't crave combat, but she wondered what it felt like to step into the unknown, to shoulder responsibility heavier than paperwork. She sometimes pictured herself steadying a rifle, like the soldiers did, aiming at unseen threats. Then she shook the thought away. That wasn't her path. She was there to serve in the shadows, keeping the armory running smoothly so others could fight. Still, there was something in her nature that made her different. Rosa wasn't content to simply log weapons. She studied them, learned their weight, balance, and mechanics. While others rushed, she lingered, practicing with scopes during quiet hours when no one watched. She told herself it was just curiosity, a way to understand the tools she managed. Every day. Yet deep inside, she felt drawn to the patience required of a marksman, the slow breathing, the unwavering focus, the silence before the shot. Patience had always been her strength. Growing up in El Paso, Texas, she'd been the quiet girl who listened more than she spoke. In a noisy household filled with cousins, uncles, and siblings, Rosa was the one who noticed details others ignored. She'd watch ants build trails in the dirt, or listen to her grandmother's voice crack with emotion while telling stories from Mexico. She carried those habits into adulthood, where noticing small things became second nature. Perhaps that was why the Army, with all its structure and repetition, felt oddly comfortable to her. Still, her role came with its frustrations. Soldiers rarely looked her in the eye when they signed forms. Some treated her as a nuisance, as though the extra minutes spent in her office delayed their real work. Others cracked jokes about her desk job, implying she didn't understand what real soldiering meant. Rosa didn't argue. She let the comments slide, burying her pride under a mask of indifference. But when she was alone, she thought about those words and what they revealed. They didn't see her as one of them. Perhaps they were right, or perhaps they were blind. The armory was more than a storeroom. It was the heart of survival, the lifeline between life and death. Without Rosa's precision, weapons went missing, ammunition counts faltered, and accountability fell apart. She carried that responsibility seriously, even if no one applauded her for it. And though she didn't carry a rifle into combat, she carried the weight of knowing each weapon she signed out might be the one that saved or ended someone's life. There were moments, however, when routine cracked open to reveal something else. During lulls, Rosa sometimes wandered onto the base's firing range. She never advertised her visits, slipping in during off hours with a borrowed rifle and a box of rounds. At first, Her shots were wide and clumsy, her shoulders straining against the recoil. But she was patient. Shot after shot, she adjusted, learning to align breath with trigger pull, steadying her hands until the rifle felt like an extension of herself. To her surprise, she grew good, very good. The range officers occasionally noticed her precision and raised eyebrows, but they said nothing. To them, she was simply a clerk passing time. Yet Rosa knew better. Every tight grouping of bullet holes on the target awakened something in her chest, a quiet sense of possibility. She never bragged, never showed off, but she carried those secret sessions like hidden chapters of her story. Despite her skill, Rosa never considered herself more than what her title said. She was the Armory Clerk, safe, boring, forgettable, but Afghanistan had a way of bending fates. The base where she worked was nestled near a restless village, its high walls promising safety that often felt fragile. Soldiers came and went, their faces changing with deployments. Convoys rumbled out daily, returning with dust, injuries, and stories that unsettled Rosa's sleep. Some never returned at all. The war outside those walls was always pressing inward, like a tide testing the strength of sandbags. Rosa felt it every time sirens wailed or distant booms shook the ground. She told herself the walls would hold, that her role would never place her in danger. Yet deep down, she sensed otherwise. Every day, when she locked the armory doors at dusk, Rosa felt the weight of something unspoken. Her patience, her quiet practice, her observations, none of it felt wasted. It felt like preparation. For what? She didn't know. She only knew that life had a way of pushing ordinary people into extraordinary moments when least expected, and Rosa's moment was coming. She just didn't know that the woman overlooked as just the clerk would soon be the name whispered with awe across the battlefield. The rifles she had signed out for years would become her own instruments, and the patience that once made her invisible would make her unforgettable. At that point, however, Rosa still sat behind her desk, surrounded by paperwork, oil, and steel, unseen by the very people whose lives she was destined to save. The story had not yet begun, but the first page had already been written. The morning began like any other. The desert sun had not yet climbed high enough to scorch the camp, and the air carried a deceptive stillness. Rosa sat behind her desk in the armory, stamping paperwork and shuffling forms into neat stacks. A kettle of coffee steamed beside her, its bitter scent clinging to the air. Soldiers drifted in and out, exchanging sleepy greetings, their boots scuffing against the dusty concrete floor. It was routine, the kind of repetition that lulled her into believing the war outside could not reach her here. Then the silence shattered. The first explosion shook the ground like an earthquake, rattling the rifles locked on their racks. Papers scattered from Rosa's desk, floating like startled birds. She froze, heart hammering, as sirens wailed across the base. Voices erupted outside, shouts of warning, calls for cover, curses torn from startled throats. The faint staccato of gunfire cracked in the distance, then closer, rolling in waves as chaos poured through the perimeter. Rosa's instinct told her this wasn't a drill. She'd endured countless practice alarms, each one ending with officers reminding them to stay sharp. But this was different. The shouts carried raw panic, the kind that only came when death was close. She ran to the doorway and peered outside. Dust and smoke billowed across the compound. Soldiers scrambled for defensive positions, rifles raised, eyes scanning for enemies. The base gates had been breached, and insurgents were flooding in with terrifying speed. Rosa saw muzzle flashes in the distance, followed by screams. The battlefield had erupted inside the very walls that were supposed to protect them. Her body trembled. She wasn't supposed to be here, not like this. Her role was paperwork, not firefights. But instinct surged before fear could take hold. She spun back into the armory, slamming the door behind her as though thin metal could shield her from chaos. Her gaze swept the racks of weapons she'd signed out countless times for others. Her pulse thundered. Her hands landed on a sniper rifle. It was heavier than the rifles she often logged, the long barrel gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. She remembered its serial number, its designated owner, even the last time it had been cleaned. It wasn't hers to take, yet in that moment, the weight in her arms felt like necessity. Adrenaline drowned hesitation. Rosa checked the magazine with shaking hands, loaded rounds with surprising steadiness, and shouldered the rifle. She wasn't thinking about orders, rules, or her own safety. Something deeper guided her, a quiet conviction that she could do something, anything, to stop the carnage outside. She bolted out the back door of the armory, weaving between concrete barriers as gunfire echoed around her. Soldiers darted past, some shouting for medics, others returning fire with desperate bursts. No one noticed the armory clerk sprinting across the open yard with a sniper rifle clutched tight. No one stopped her. The guard tower loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of steel and sandbags. Its ladder stretched upward, exposed against the chaos. Rosa didn't hesitate. She climbed, muscles straining, lungs burning. Bullets hissed somewhere. Too close, but she kept moving, driven by something stronger than fear. At the top, she pulled herself onto the platform. The world opened beneath her. Smoke curled across the base. Insurgents swarmed through breaches, darting between walls and vehicles, firing at anything that moved. Rosa's chest heaved as she raised the rifle, pressing her cheek to the stock. Through the scope, the chaos sharpened into terrifying clarity. She scanned, heart hammering, until her breath caught. Across the dirt road, near the edge of the barracks, she saw him, an insurgent, kneeling with a rocket launcher perched on his shoulder. He was aiming directly at the long building where dozens of soldiers huddled inside, unarmed, waiting for orders. One squeeze of his trigger, and dozens would die. Rosa's hands steadied. Memories of late nights at the firing range rushed back her. Quiet practice, the patience she had honed when no one watched. Every lesson whispered through her veins. Breathe in, hold, focus. Her world narrowed to a single point, the man with the rocket. She ignored the chaos, ignored the sirens, ignored the pounding of her own heart. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked, loud yet strangely final. Through the scope, she saw the man's head snap back. He crumpled, the rocket launcher clattering uselessly to the ground. The barracks remained untouched. The soldiers inside lived. For a heartbeat, Rosa couldn't move. She had done it. She had fired not at a paper target, not at a silhouette, but at a living enemy. The weight of it pressed against her chest. Yet there was no time to reflect. Below, soldiers cheered as they noticed what had happened. Shouts of relief mingled with gunfire. But Rosa knew the battle wasn't over. She adjusted her position, scanning through the scope again. Another insurgent appeared, and another. She fired, each shot steadier than the last, her breathing syncing with the rhythm of the trigger. Enemies fell one by one, and the tide began to shift. Soldiers rallied, pushing back with renewed force, emboldened by the unseen guardian above. In those frantic minutes, Rosa wasn't the overlooked clerk anymore. She was the line between survival and slaughter. Her patience, her practice, her hidden skill, all of it converged into a moment that felt less like chance and more like destiny. By the time reinforcements secured the breach, Rosa's hands were raw from gripping the rifle, her cheeks sore from the stock. She slumped against the sandbags, chest heaving, the enormity of what she had done settling into her bones. Below, Soldiers pointed up at the tower, some clapping, some saluting, their voices filled with gratitude and disbelief. The armory clerk had saved them. Rosa climbed down slowly, legs trembling. She carried the rifle back toward the armory, each step heavy with exhaustion. The battlefield had quieted, but inside her, something new stirred in awareness she couldn't ignore. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. She returned the rifle to its rack, hands lingering on the cold steel. It no longer felt like just another weapon. It felt like a piece of her own story. For years, she had been invisible. But now, she had stepped into a role that demanded everything. She had kept hidden. The woman who once shuffled paperwork had become the soldier no one saw coming. And though she couldn't yet imagine what that meant for her future, Rosa knew one thing with certainty. The war had found her, and she had answered. The tower felt like it was swaying beneath Rosa's boots, though she knew it was only her trembling legs. The metal platform was steady, secured with bolts and sandbags, but her body betrayed the storm inside her. She pressed her cheek against the cold stock of the rifle, the scope narrowing her world to a circle of terrifying clarity. Below, chaos rolled across the base like wildfire. The air was thick with dust and smoke, the acrid stench of burning fuel mixing with gunpowder. Soldiers shouted, their voices nearly swallowed by the relentless crack of gunfire. The battle wasn't over. Rosa tried to steady her breathing. She could still hear the echo of that first shot in her bones, could still see the insurgent crumpling with the rocket slipping from his hands. That one bullet had shifted the tide, but now new enemies poured through the breach, their silhouettes darting between barriers. The barracks had been saved for now, but dozens of soldiers were still pinned down, exchanging fire with overwhelming numbers. Her finger tightened against the trigger again. She spotted another figure through the scope, an insurgent crouching behind a vehicle, lining up his rifle toward the medical tent. Rosa's lungs locked. She adjusted, exhaled, and fired. The shot struck true. He collapsed, his weapon skidding across the dirt. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Every shot she fired carried weight she could hardly comprehend. These weren't faceless targets on paper. These were people. Enemies, yes, but human nonetheless. And yet, for every man she dropped, she spared lives on her side. That thought anchored her, even as her stomach knotted. She didn't have time to dwell. Another flash of movement caught her eye. This one was closer, an insurgent, sprinting across open ground, with grenades strapped to his vest. Rosa's breath hitched. If he reached the cluster of vehicles ahead, the explosion would devastate everything nearby. She tracked him, forcing herself not to rush. Patience. Breathe. Wait for the moment. He was seconds from cover when she pulled the trigger. The round struck, and he crumpled mid-stride, the grenades clattering harmlessly beside him. Rosa's chest seized, her breath ragged. She whispered to herself, words she didn't even register. Steady, steady. Her hands were shaking, but her shots were not. Down below, soldiers began to notice. They shouted encouragement, some pointing toward the tower as if signaling to one another that someone up there was watching over them. Rosa couldn't hear the words clearly through the din, but she understood the meaning. They were rallying. The unseen sniper above had become their shield. Rosa adjusted again, eyes scanning for new threats. Through the glass of her scope, the world slowed. She noticed the smallest details, the way dust swirled in the air, the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off a rifle barrel, the nervous twitch of an enemy's shoulder before he fired. Her patience became her greatest weapon, while chaos reigned. For everyone else, she lived inside a bubble of stillness, each breath controlling the rhythm of life and death. She fired again, and again, Each shot was deliberate, purposeful. Each shot reminded her of late nights at the firing range when no one believed her presence mattered. Those hours had not been wasted. They had been preparation for this very moment. Time blurred. The battle felt endless, yet every shot Rosa placed pushed the tide back inch by inch. She became lost in the rhythm of its spot, breathe, fire, reload. The rifle felt alive in her hands, no longer just a tool she managed for others, but an extension of herself. At last, the gunfire began to wane. Reinforcements surged to the breach, forcing the insurgents to retreat. Rosa's ears rang with silence that felt almost foreign after the relentless noise. Smoke lingered, curling upward into the harsh Afghan sky. Bodies both friendly and enemy were scattered across the dirt, grim reminders of the cost. Her hands slipped from the rifle, and she realized how numb they felt. She leaned against the sandbags, chest heaving, throat dry, as if she had swallowed sand. A bitter taste filled her mouth. She had survived her first battle. More than that, she had changed it. But the weight of what she had done pressed down on her. She had killed. More than once. Rosa closed her eyes, trying to steady the churn in her stomach. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel like a hero. Instead, she felt hollow, shaken by the enormity of the choices she had made in seconds. Yet when she opened her eyes and looked down at the soldiers below, she saw their faces turned upward, their eyes filled with gratitude. They weren't looking at her like a clerk anymore. They were looking at her like a savior. She descended the ladder slowly, each rung rattling beneath her boots. When her feet touched the ground, soldiers rushed toward her. One young private clasped her shoulder with wide eyes. "That was you up there, wasn't it?" His voice shook, not from fear but from awe. Another soldier slapped her back, grinning despite the dirt smeared across his face. "You saved the whole damn barracks." Rosa didn't know how to respond. She managed only a small nod, her throat too tight for words. She wanted to disappear, to slip back into the anonymity of paperwork and ledgers. But anonymity was gone now. Commanders arrived, demanding reports, trying to piece together how the base had nearly been overrun and how it had been saved. Rosa stood silently as soldiers pointed toward her, voices overlapping, recounting what she had done. The commanders turned their eyes on her, scrutinizing the clerk, who had become something else in the span of a morning. "You fired those shots?" one officer asked. Rosa hesitated. "Yes, sir." His brow furrowed, not in doubt, but in calculation. He saw something in her, the same thing she had felt coursing through her veins in the tower. Potential. Precision. A soldier who had stepped into the fire and not faltered. But Rosa didn't feel like potential. She felt exhausted. She wanted to crawl into her bunk and hide from the world. She wanted to forget the images burned into her memory, the men collapsing through her scope, the finality of each pull of the trigger. Yet even as she longed for escape, she knew it was impossible. She had crossed a line, and she could never step back. That night, Rosa sat alone in her quarters, the rifle's weight still ghosting across her hands. The base was quieter now, though tension lingered in the air, like smoke after a fire. Soldiers passed outside her door, their voices hushed, their steps heavy. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in her mind. Her thoughts swirled between guilt and pride, fear and determination. She hadn't sought this role, but it had found her. And deep inside, she felt a truth she couldn't deny. The patience that had once made her invisible had made her formidable. The clerk had become the sniper. And tomorrow, if the war demanded it, she would climb that tower again. The days that followed the attack felt unreal to Rosa Martinez. For years, she had blended into the background of the base, her presence acknowledged, only with curt nods as soldiers signed out weapons. But now, every passing glance seemed to linger longer than before. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. Soldiers whispered, nudging one another, their eyes filled with curiosity and something else, respect. Word traveled faster than bullets. The story spread across the camp like wildfire. The armory clerk who had climbed the tower and turned the tide of battle. Some exaggerated, painting her as a lone savior who had picked off enemies with impossible precision. Others swore she had spotted threats no one else could see, her eyes sharper than any scope. Rumors rarely matched reality, but the truth was extraordinary enough. She had been the one who saved them. Rosa hated the attention. She preferred shadows, the comfort of anonymity. Now, soldiers she barely knew saluted her in passing, or clapped her on the shoulder with thanks. A group of young privates even began calling her La Fantasma, the ghost. Rosa smiled politely, but inside she recoiled. She didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a woman haunted by the faces she had seen through her scope. Yet she couldn't escape what had happened. The base was still under threat. The insurgents had not given up, and each new day carried the tension of an attack waiting to happen. Every time the sirens wailed, soldiers instinctively looked toward the tower, as though expecting her to be there. At first, Rosa resisted. She reminded herself she wasn't a sniper, wasn't officially trained for combat roles. Her place was behind the desk, keeping track of weapons, not firing them. But when the attacks came, hesitation melted away. The first time after that morning, Rosa tried to stay in the armory. She clutched the desk, willing herself not to move, telling herself it wasn't her responsibility. But then she heard the gunfire. She heard the panicked calls over the radio, voices laced with desperation. Her legs carried her before her mind could argue. She grabbed the same rifle, bolted to the tower, and once again pressed her eye to the scope. The battlefield answered her with clarity. Enemies moved where soldiers couldn't see them, lining up shots that could have ended lives. Rosa saw them. Rosa stopped them. Each trigger pull was heavy, yet necessary. When the dust settled, soldiers below pointed upward, their shouts of relief echoing against the concrete walls. From then on, it became unspoken. Rosa would be in the tower when the danger came. Each attack tested her further. Her shots grew steadier, her patience sharper. What began as instinct became discipline, a rhythm she embraced with grim acceptance. She wasn't just lucky. She was skilled, though. She never boasted of it. Others called her a hero, a protector, a guardian. She called herself something simpler, a soldier doing what had to be done. Still, the transformation unsettled her. At night, Rosa lay awake in her bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying each shot in her mind. She remembered the small details, how one enemy had adjusted his cap seconds before she fired, how another had glanced toward the sky, as if sensing his end. She wondered if they had families waiting for them, if they were driven by conviction or desperation. She didn't hate them, but she couldn't let them win. That conflict lived inside her, heavy as the rifle she carried. The base commanders could no longer ignore her. Reports from each engagement listed her kills, each one corroborated by grateful soldiers. Commanders visited the tower themselves, watching her work through binoculars as though to confirm the rumors. When the attacks ended, they summoned her to briefings, asking how she spotted threats so quickly, how she decided when to fire. Rosa answered quietly, humbly, never exaggerating. She insisted she was only doing what needed to be done. But the commanders saw more. "You have a gift," one officer told her, his voice carrying both admiration and calculation. "Not many can stay that calm under fire." Rosa lowered her gaze. "I don't feel calm, sir." "Doesn't matter how you feel," he said. What matters is what you do." His words lingered long after he left. Rosa thought about them every time she sat in the tower, rifle balanced on sandbags, the world funneled into the circle of her scope. Did she have a gift? Or was she simply patient enough to see what others missed? Perhaps it didn't matter. The soldiers below didn't care whether it was talent or chance. They only cared that she was there, watching over them. The whispers of La Fantasma grew louder. Soldiers joked that she could see through walls, that enemies fell the moment she glanced their way. Some claimed insurgents had begun to hesitate at the edges of the base, fearful of the unseen sniper waiting above. Rosa dismissed the rumors, but part of her wondered if they held truth. Fear could be as powerful a weapon as any rifle. Yet Rosa never let pride take root. Each time she pulled the trigger, she reminded herself of the lives she was protecting. She thought of the young privates barely out of high school, the medics who carried stretchers instead of rifles, the cooks who kept the base fed. She wasn't firing for glory. She was firing for them. One evening, after another skirmish had been repelled, a soldier approached her in the mess hall. He was older, with streaks of gray in his hair and scars tracing his arms. He set down his tray and looked her in the eye. "My boys are alive because of you," he said simply. Rosa swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She nodded, her throat tight. She didn't need his thanks, but she carried his words like a weight, both burden and blessing. Over time, Rosa realized the tower had become more than a perch. It was a symbol. Soldiers drew strength from knowing she was up there, eyes scanning the horizon. Her presence gave them courage, a reminder that someone was watching, protecting. And though Rosa still longed for anonymity, she couldn't deny the role she had grown into. She was no longer invisible. The woman who once shuffled papers and checked serial numbers had become the guardian of the base. Her rifle was no longer just a weapon. It was trust. It was responsibility. It was destiny pressing firmly into her hands. And though Rosa still questioned the path that had brought her here, she knew one truth with certainty. As long as her comrades needed her, she would climb that tower again. The clerk had become the protector, and the war was only just beginning. The day Rosa Martinez received her reassignment orders, she sat on her bunk staring at the paper as though it belonged to someone else. Her name was typed neatly at the top, followed by the words Sniper Detachment, attached to Recon Unit Bravo. It didn't make sense. She wasn't a sniper. She wasn't even supposed to be in combat. Yet the paper in her hands was undeniable, stamped and signed by officers who had watched her climb the tower again and again, defending the base with shots too precise to ignore. Her quiet world had ended. A new one waited. When Rosa reported to the sniper unit, the reception was cold. The men looked her over with expressions that hovered between disbelief and annoyance. They were seasoned marksmen, veterans of countless missions. Their gear was worn from use, their faces lined by experience. To them, she was an outsider, a clerk plucked from paperwork and thrown into their brotherhood without earning her place. "You're the Armory girl, right?" one of them muttered. His tone carried no respect. Rosa stood straighter. "Specialist." "Martinez, sir." Another man, broad-shouldered and scarred, snorted. "Let's see how long you last." Their skepticism pressed against her like heat. Rosa felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken judgment. They didn't trust her. Not yet. The unit's commander, Captain Hayes, broke the silence. His voice was calm but firm. "She's here because command says she's earned it. Whether you like it or not, she's part of this team now." Even so, Rosa knew words alone wouldn't win respect. Only action would. The first mission came quickly. Rosa climbed into a Humvee with the others, her rifle resting across her lap. The vehicle bounced across rough terrain, the Afghan mountains, looming in jagged silhouettes. Dust whipped through the air, stinging her eyes. She felt the men watching her, silently measuring every movement. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. They stopped near a ridge, overlooking a valley known for insurgent activity. The plan was simple: provide overwatch while infantry cleared a nearby compound. Rosa sat up beside Sergeant Cole, the unit's most experienced sniper. He didn't speak to her, didn't offer guidance. He simply adjusted his scope and settled in. Rosa did the same. Through her scope, the world narrowed to the valley below. She saw the infantry unit moving cautiously, their helmets bobbing between walls. Shadows shifted in windows, movements too deliberate to be civilians. Rosa steadied her breath, her heart slowing to a rhythm she trusted. Then she saw him. An insurgent crouched on a rooftop, rifle aimed at the advancing soldiers. Rosa whispered into her radio, voice steady. Target on the north rooftop. 1 o'clock, armed. No one responded. She realized they were waiting, testing her. Rosa didn't hesitate. She adjusted her scope, squeezed the trigger. The insurgent dropped, his rifle clattering across the roof. Below, the infantry pushed forward safely, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Sergeant Cole finally spoke, his tone begrudging. "Good eye." It wasn't praise exactly, but it was acknowledgement. And that was enough. The mission continued. Rosa spotted threats. Others missed an insurgent peeking from behind a wall, another preparing an RPG near a doorway. Each time she called it out. Each time her shots were true. By the time the infantry secured the compound, the sniper unit had seen what Rosa could do. Back at base, the men were quieter around her, not welcoming, but no longer dismissive. Respect wasn't given overnight, but it had begun. For Rosa, the shift was surreal. She remembered the days when soldiers barely looked at her while signing out weapons. Now, hardened veterans listened when she spoke, trusted her eyes, relied on her trigger. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply carried the responsibility with the same patience that had guided her all along. The missions grew harder. Recon operations pushed deep into hostile territory, where every shadow hid danger. Rosa learned to move silently across ridge lines, to blend into the earth itself. She studied wind currents, calculating how a single gust could shift a bullet's path. She learned to wait hours without moving, her body aching, her eyes burning, until the right moment arrived. Patience became more than a skill. It became survival. The men tested her still. On one mission, Sergeant Cole handed her the longest shot of the day, a target nearly 1,000 yards out. "Let's see if the Armory Clerk can handle this," he muttered. Rosa said nothing. She adjusted her scope, controlled her breathing, and waited. The insurgent appeared briefly between two mud-brick buildings, carrying a radio used to coordinate attacks. Rosa squeezed the trigger. The man fell. Instantly. Cole's silence afterward said more than words could. She had passed his test. Slowly, the doubts faded. Around the campfire, the men began including her in conversations. They asked her opinion on wind, on ranges, on tactics. They stopped calling her the clerk and started calling her Martinez. In their world, that was respect. Rosa never let the recognition inflate her. She carried every mission with solemn weight. She didn't count kills like trophies. She counted the lives spared. Each shot was a decision, and she never took it lightly. But the enemy learned her name, too. Word spread among insurgents of a woman sniper attached to the Americans, her accuracy uncanny. They whispered of the ghost in the mountains, a figure who saw them before they saw her. Some refused to believe the stories. Others believed so deeply that fear spread through their ranks. Rosa heard the rumors, but ignored them. She wasn't a ghost. She was a soldier. And she knew better than anyone that legends were built from blood. Still, she felt the weight of destiny pressing harder. Her patience, her skill, her choices, everything that had once made her invisible, now made her indispensable. She hadn't asked for this path, but it was hers. And as the war deepened, Rosa Martinez knew there was no turning back. The clerk was gone. The sniper had taken her place. By the time winter rolled into the Afghan mountains, Rosa Martinez had become more than a soldier. She had become a story. It began quietly, as whispers in the barracks. Men returning from patrols spoke about the sniper who had saved their lives. The ghost-like figure who saw enemies before anyone else. These tales slipped into official reports, and those reports found their way into the hands of journalists hungry for narratives that could capture the public's imagination. Soon headlines appeared back home. From Armory Clerk to Battlefield. Guardian, the unexpected sniper. The deadliest eye in Afghanistan. Rosa hated every word. She wasn't a guardian or a legend. She was a soldier doing what had to be done, one trigger pull at a time. But once stories caught fire, they couldn't be controlled. News outlets wanted interviews, photos, quotes. Commanders denied them at first, insisting operational security came first, but even they couldn't resist shaping Rosa into a symbol. She was proof that anyone, no matter their role, could rise to extraordinary duty. Behind the image, Rosa felt trapped. Her unit treated her with respect now, but it came laced with expectation. Soldiers would glance at her during missions, silently asking her to spot what they missed. Younger recruits whispered her name like a charm, believing her presence meant safety. The more they relied on her, the more pressure she felt. One mistake, one missed target, and their faith would shatter. And Rosa knew the truth. She wasn't perfect. Each mission brought mistake shots she hesitated to take, moments when she almost misjudged wind or distance. Sometimes she corrected in time. Sometimes another sniper covered her. She didn't always save the day. But the legend left no room for flaws. At night, guilt gnawed at her. She saw the faces of the men she killed through her scope. She remembered details others would have missed, the way one enemy had adjusted his scarf seconds before she fired, the way another had looked over his shoulder as though sensing something. They weren't nameless shadows to her. They were people who had chosen the wrong side, but people nonetheless. Rosa didn't hate them. She hated what the war forced her to do. Yet she also knew hesitation could cost lives. Every bullet she fired spared soldiers from returning in body bags. Families back home would hug their children, their parents, their spouses, because she had done what others couldn't. That knowledge steadied her, even as it tore her apart inside. Commanders leaned into her story. She was asked to attend briefings with generals sitting stiffly in rooms where maps covered the walls and strategies were debated over steaming coffee. They praised her as indispensable. A word Rosa never wanted to hear. She didn't want to be indispensable. She wanted to be unseen, another nameless soldier blending into the background. But anonymity was gone. "You're an asset, specialist," one general told her. "Your presence changes the battlefield. That kind of talent can't be hidden." Rosa bit her tongue. Talent, that was what they called it. She called it survival. The contrast between how the world saw her and how she saw herself deepened. With every mission, soldiers cheered her, commanders decorated her, journalists painted her as a myth. But Rosa carried silence. Her silence was heavy in the mess hall, where laughter sometimes rang too loud for her tired ears. It was heavy in her bunk, where she stared at the cracked ceiling and replayed the sound of gunfire in her mind. It was heavy on rooftops, ridges, and towers, where she waited for shadows to move and threats to reveal themselves. Silence became her truest companion. Then one day, a package arrived. Inside was a magazine with her face on the cover. An image snapped when she hadn't noticed the camera. Rifle slung over her shoulder, dust streaking her cheeks. The headline screamed, "America's Deadliest Woman." Rosa's stomach churned. She shoved the magazine deep into her locker, but she couldn't escape what it meant. Back home, her family would see it. Strangers would debate her existence over dinner tables. Enemies would use it as propaganda, claiming the American scent. Assassins instead of soldiers. The myth had grown too large, and the insurgents took notice. Intercepted communications revealed her name, twisted into warnings. Beware the woman sniper. She waits for you. She sees everything. Some insurgent leaders placed bounties on her, promising riches to whoever could kill her. Rosa laughed bitterly when she heard. She wasn't rich, wasn't powerful, wasn't anything like the figure they imagined. She was just a woman with a rifle, clinging to duty. But she knew the danger was real. The more famous she became, the more they would hunt her. Her comrades tried to lighten the burden. Around the fire, they teased her about being famous, asked if she'd sign their helmets, called her Hollywood. Rosa forced smiles, but never let the jokes reach her heart. Fame didn't feel like honor. It felt like chains tightening with every headline. What haunted her most wasn't the attention. It was the thought of losing herself. She still remembered. The clerk she once was, the quiet woman counting rifles, the one nobody noticed. That woman felt distant now, a ghost of a life swallowed by war. Rosa feared she was becoming nothing more than the legend others created. So she clung fiercely to small rituals. She wrote letters to her mother, though she never revealed the truth of her role. She read worn paperback novels at night, the kind she used to borrow from libraries back home. She polished her rifle carefully, not as a weapon, but as a tool one she respected, one she never allowed herself to glorify. It was her way of staying human in a world determined to make her a myth. And yet, every mission reminded her of reality. On the mountainside, waiting for hours, she would feel the wind shift across her cheek. She would listen to the silence, stretch until it snapped with the crack of a rifle. In those moments, there were no headlines, no commanders, no myths. There was only Rosa, the rifle, and the responsibility of choosing who lived and who died. That was the truth. That was her burden. And though Rosa despised the fame, she carried it anyway, because fame, unlike war, was something she could not escape. The legend of Rosa Martinez spread faster than bullets. Among her fellow soldiers, she was a name spoken with admiration, sometimes even superstition. They said her scope never missed, that her eyes pierced through smoke and distance, that she could sense danger before it revealed itself. New arrivals to the base whispered about her as if she were a myth, unsure whether she was real until they saw her sitting quietly with her rifle. Among the enemy, the legend was darker. Insurgents told stories of La Fantasma, the ghost. They warned each other to keep heads low when approaching American positions, for the woman sniper could strike without warning. Some claimed she fired from impossible distances. Others swore she was invisible, moving between ridges unseen. In the chaos of war, rumors became truth. And then came the bounty. Radio intercepts revealed it first. Leaders of the insurgent networks promised rewards, money, weapons, even land to anyone who could kill the ghost. The amount was staggering, far more than most fighters would see in their lifetimes. Rosa's name, spoken in hushed tones, had become a target painted across her back. When she first heard about it, Rosa laughed, but the laughter was hollow. The idea that people she had never met would risk everything to kill her felt surreal. It wasn't personal to them. She was a figure, a symbol of American strength. Killing her would be a victory, not for themselves, but for the myth she represented, Her unit didn't take it lightly. "From now on, you don't go anywhere alone," Captain Hayes ordered. "You're too valuable, too vulnerable." Rosa bristled at the restriction. She didn't want protection. She didn't want to be treated like something fragile or sacred. But she couldn't deny the truth. The bounty had changed everything. Enemies were no longer just attacking Americans. Were hunting her. Every mission felt heavier. On ridges overlooking valleys, she scanned the horizon with sharper intensity. Knowing somewhere out there, eyes searched for her too. She began to sense their attention, the way traps seemed laid specifically for her, the way insurgents sometimes shifted fire towards sniper positions instead of infantry. She realized she wasn't just part of the battlefield anymore. She was shaping it. Her comrades leaned into the legend. Before missions, young soldiers would pat her shoulder, murmuring, "Keep an eye out for us, Ghost." They carried a kind of faith in her, a belief that as long as Rosa watched, they were safe. She didn't argue with them, though the weight of that trust pressed like lead against her chest. Faith was a dangerous thing in war. One mistake could shatter it. The pressure crept into her nights. Sleep came in short, restless bursts. She dreamed of faceless enemies, climbing ridges, swarming towers, shouting her name in languages she didn't understand. She dreamed of pulling the trigger and missing. Waking always left her drenched in sweat, her heart hammering, her hands clenched around nothing. During missions, though, she remained steady. Her scope became her world, a circle of clarity amidst chaos. Through it, she found the threats others missed, the faint glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel, the slight movement of a curtain in a mud-brick house, the shift of weight that revealed an ambush. Her patience was unmatched. She could wait for hours unmoving until the perfect moment appeared. When it did, her shot was final. With every success, the legend grew. Insurgents began spreading rumors of curses. Some claimed she wasn't human, that bullets couldn't touch her, that she was protected by spirits. Others dismissed it, saying she was just a woman with a gun. But even they lowered their heads when crossing open ground, afraid to test whether she was watching. The myth gave her side an edge. Fear weakened enemies before battles began. But Rosa hated the myth all the same. Because the more they saw her as a ghost, the less she felt like herself. She wasn't invisible, wasn't untouchable. She was flesh and blood, with fears and doubts and guilt that clawed at her nightly. The men she killed were not phantoms. They were people. She never let herself forget that, no matter how much the stories tried to paint her as something beyond human. One evening, after a mission where she had taken 3 shots that saved an entire patrol from ambush, Sergeant Cole sat beside her by the fire. He had once doubted her, but now his voice carried respect. "You know what they're saying about you out there?" he asked, poking at the flames. "I try not to listen. They think you're not real, that you're some kind of demon." He chuckled. "You've got them spooked, Martinez." Rosa stared into the fire, her face shadowed. "I'm not a demon. I'm just tired." Cole nodded. "Yeah, but tired. Or not, you're keeping a lot of us alive." His words offered no comfort. They only reminded her of the responsibility she carried, the fragile balance between life and death that rested on her patience and precision. As weeks turned into months, Rosa began to notice subtle changes in herself. She spoke less, smiled less, withdrew from the camaraderie of her unit. While others joked and laughed, she polished her rifle or wrote in her notebook, recording memories she couldn't share. She didn't want to lose herself completely to the ghost they believed in. But war has a way of stripping choices. Every mission demanded her presence. Every soldier leaned on her eyes. She could no longer fade into the background. She had become the sharp edge of their survival. Whether she wanted it or not, She was the ghost in the mountains. One night, lying in her bunk, Rosa whispered to herself in the dark, "I'm not a ghost. I'm not a ghost." But in the silence that followed, even she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Rosa Martinez stepped off the military transport with a strange mix of relief and unease. The air smelled different here, heavier, softer, not burned by dust or gunpowder. She had returned to the United States, a land she had left years ago, to serve. Streets were crowded, bright advertisements flashed at every corner, and the hum of everyday life was loud and chaotic compared to the rigid silence of the mountains she had known. She expected joy. She expected celebration. Instead, she felt dislocation. Her uniform carried medals, ribbons, and insignia that reflected deeds no one fully understood. Crowds gathered at the airport, cameras flashing, reporters jostling for position. Rosa's name had reached homes across the country headlines. Television segments and radio interviews had immortalized her, the deadliest sniper, the Armory Clerk turned hero, La Fantasma. She was famous. And she hated it. Rosa remembered her first day as a clerk, counting rifles, filing logs, invisible behind the paperwork that kept others alive. Back then, she had been content with obscurity. Her life had been quiet, measured, predictable. She had wanted nothing more than to do her job well and return home each day without fanfare. Now she was a symbol. Journalists shoved microphones into her face as soon as she walked down the terminal. Cameras clicked relentlessly. Everyone wanted her story, the transformation from desk worker to sharpshooter, the life or death moments captured in vivid detail, the calm precision under fire that had saved countless soldiers. Rosa smiled politely, gave the standard sound bites. I was just doing my duty, but every word felt hollow. Duty had been her guide, not glory. Yet glory had found her, whether she wanted it or not. Her family waited in the crowd. Her mother clutched her father's arm, eyes wide, tears streaming. Her younger siblings stared in awe, unsure if the person before them was the same quiet Rosa they had known. She hugged them, feeling the warmth and love she had longed for in Afghanistan. But beneath it, a tension lingered. She wasn't the same girl they remembered. The war had changed her in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. Rosa, her mother whispered, pressing a hand to her cheek, we're so proud of you. She wanted to nod, to smile, to tell them it was nothing, just her duty. But duty had demanded she take lives, witness blood, and bear the silence of decisions that weighed heavier than metals. Pride didn't fit neatly into that. In the days that followed, she attended ceremonies, received official commendations, and spoke at gatherings. Politicians shook her hand, journalists published glowing profiles, and young girls sent letters saying she was their hero. She read them, smiled politely, tucked them away, and returned to her quiet reflection each night. Even in recognition, she remained restless. Her dreams still returned her to the mountains. She saw the faces of those she had killed, felt the recoil of every shot, and heard the whispers of soldiers she had saved. Fame and medals could not silence those memories. She realized she had become two people, the public Rosa, the myth, and the private Rosa, the one who had simply survived, done her duty, and remained human in the shadows. She longed for invisibility again. Yet she knew that invisibility was gone. The world had decided she was extraordinary. People needed the myth, needed the reassurance that courage could exist in the unlikeless places. She couldn't undo that. Rosa also noticed something unexpected. Her story inspired others. Young women in the military wrote to her, asking how they could achieve excellence despite doubt. Soldiers praised her for proving that courage wasn't measured by rank or past experience, but by resolve. Though she resented the attention, she couldn't deny its impact. Her journey from clerk to sniper had shown the world what patience, skill, and determination could do. Still, she moved carefully through the crowds, wary of adulation. Every handshake, every photograph, felt like a tether tying her to the legend. She wanted to walk alone, to exist simply, but she realized that legends aren't owned by the person. They belong to everyone who hears them. At night, in the quiet of her childhood home, Rosa finally allowed herself reflection. She unpacked the small mementos she had brought back, the worn notebook where she recorded observations, the rifle cleaning kit she had polished obsessively, the letters from soldiers she had protected. They reminded her of the reality beneath. The headlines. She hadn't been chosen for fame. She had been chosen by circumstance, sharpened by patience, and propelled by necessity. Her reflection was honest and complex. She had saved lives, yes. She had become a legend, yes, but she was not invincible. She had known fear. She had known doubt. She had borne guilt heavier than any metal. Rosa realized the myth was only a fraction of the truth. She was still Rosa the girl who had once been invisible, who had carefully logged rifles, who had learned to see details others missed. Yet Rosa still existed inside her, quietly guiding her, reminding her that humanity mattered as much as precision. She understood finally that the myth was necessary. It inspired, it comforted, it represented courage. But it did not define her entirely. Rosa stood by her bedroom window one evening, looking out at the city lights. She thought of the mountains, the towers, the valleys, the moments where life and death had balanced on her patience and resolve. She thought of the soldiers she had saved and those she had lost. She thought of the headlines and the letters, the fame and the medals, the myth and the truth. She whispered to herself, quietly, I was just the clerk. But I did what had to be done, and that was enough. The world could call her a hero, a ghost, or the deadliest sniper. She would not argue. But she knew the deeper truth. She was still herself, shaped by the past, marked by experience, and defined not by legend, but by choices made in silence and courage in the shadows. Rosa Martinez had returned home. She had survived the war. She had carried loves on her shoulders. And she had finally discovered a balance between the myth the world celebrated and the quiet truth she alone would carry. She closed her eyes, finally allowing herself a small, genuine smile. The armory clerk was gone. The sniper was legendary. But Rosa, the girl who had noticed everything, learned patience, and acted when it mattered most, remained intact, whole, human, and that, above all, mattered.